You're sitting in your manager's office, the room unnervingly quiet except for the sound of her pen tapping against the desk. The quarterly review meeting you've been dreading for days. She looks up from your report, expression unreadable, and delivers the blow. This project didn't meet our expectations. The analysis lacks depth, the conclusions are weak, and frankly, I expected much more from someone at your level. Your heart pounds. Heat rushes to your face. Your mind floods with competing responses. Defend yourself? Make excuses? Blame others? Or perhaps worst of all, internalize this criticism as proof of your inadequacy. In this moment, everything seems to hang in the balance. Your reputation, your confidence, perhaps even your future at the company. We've all been there. Criticism at work cuts deep, often triggering primal responses that do little to serve our growth or well-being. The feedback might be delivered harshly, publicly, unexpectedly, or even unfairly. But regardless of how it arrives, our reaction to criticism often defines us more than the criticism itself. This is where Stoicism offers something revolutionary, not merely as an intellectual exercise, but as a practical philosophy built for precisely these moments of challenge. The ancient Stoics weren't academics isolated from worldly pressures. They were emperors making life or death decisions, advisors navigating treacherous political waters, and ordinary citizens facing adversity. They developed their philosophy in the crucible of real-world tests. Today, we'll explore how their timeless wisdom can transform one of the most difficult aspects of professional life, receiving criticism. Not by teaching you to become emotionless or indifferent, but by helping you respond with genuine strength, wisdom, and even gratitude. Why criticism stings so deeply. Before we can apply Stoic principles to workplace criticism, we must understand why criticism affects us so powerfully. This isn't merely academic. Recognizing the roots of our reactions is essential to transforming them. When your colleague points out flaws in your presentation or your supervisor questions your approach to a project, the discomfort you feel isn't just about the specific critique. The human brain processes social rejection remarkably similarly to physical pain. Evolutionary psychologists suggest this occurs because, for our ancestors, social exclusion could mean death. Being criticized triggers our brain's threat response, the same system that activates when we face physical danger. Furthermore, we often tie our professional identity deeply to our sense of self-worth. Our work becomes an extension of who we are. This entanglement means criticism of our work can feel like criticism of our very being. Your report was inadequate transforms in our minds to, you are inadequate. There's also the matter of control. We invest tremendous energy into our work, carefully crafting our professional image. Criticism threatens this narrative we've constructed, suggesting that despite our best efforts, others see us differently than we see ourselves. This perceived loss of control over how we're perceived can be deeply unsettling. Then there's the social dimension. Humans are inherently social creatures, and workplace criticism often carries implications about our standing in the group. When delivered publicly, criticism can trigger shame, that painful feeling that others now see us as somehow diminished or flawed. Understanding these psychological mechanisms isn't about excusing our reactivity, but about recognizing it with clear-eyed awareness. The Stoics would argue that this recognition is the first step toward freedom from these automatic responses. The Stoic reframing of criticism. The genius of Stoicism lies not in denying our human reactions, but in transforming how we see the situations that trigger them. When it comes to criticism, this reframing is nothing short of revolutionary. Consider Epictetus, who began life as a slave and later became one of history's greatest Stoic teachers. He taught that we must clearly distinguish between what is within our control and what isn't. Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens, he advised. Applied to criticism, this principle is liberating. You cannot control your colleagues' feedback, your manager's tone, or whether criticism comes at an inconvenient moment. What remains firmly within your control is your response. This Stoic dichotomy of control shifts criticism from a threat to an opportunity. Rather than experiencing feedback as an attack requiring defense, you can view it as neutral information, data points that you can evaluate and use at your discretion. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome and dedicated Stoic, wrote in his personal reflections, "How much more harmful are the consequences of anger and grief than the circumstances that arouse them in us?" This insight reminds us that our reaction to criticism often causes more suffering than the criticism itself. The momentary sting of feedback might be unavoidable, but the hours or days of rumination, shame, or resentment that follow are largely self-inflicted. The Stoics would also encourage us to separate criticism of our work from judgment of our worth. Your report, presentation, or project may have flaws, perhaps significant ones, without this reflecting on your value as a person. This separation allows you to engage with feedback on its merits rather than as an existential threat. Perhaps most powerfully, Stoicism invites us to view criticism as an opportunity for growth rather than a verdict on our capabilities. Seneca wrote, "No man's knowledge can go beyond his experience." Each piece of critical feedback represents a chance to expand your experience and, consequently, your knowledge. The colleague who points out weaknesses in your analysis is, from this perspective, offering you a gift, albeit one wrapped in uncomfortable packaging. This reframing doesn't happen instantly or effortlessly. It requires practice and commitment. But over time, it transforms criticism from something we dread and avoid into a resource we can use to strengthen our work and ourselves. Practical Stoic techniques for responding to criticism. Stoicism isn't merely theoretical. It offers practical approaches for handling life's challenges, including workplace criticism. Let's explore specific techniques drawn from Stoic philosophy that you can apply the next time you face feedback that stings. First is the practice of the pause. When criticism arrives, our immediate impulse is often to react defensively. The Stoics advocated creating space between stimulus and response. As Epictetus advised, make it your study then to confront every harsh impression with the words, "You are but an impression, and not at all what you seem to be." In practice, this might mean taking a deep breath, remaining silent for a moment, or even explicitly asking for time to consider the feedback before responding. This pause allows the initial emotional response to subside, creating room for reason to enter. Next comes objective evaluation. Once you've created that space, examine the criticism with as much objectivity as possible. Ask yourself, what elements of this feedback are factually accurate, regardless of how they were delivered? What might I learn from this perspective, even if I ultimately disagree with parts of it? The Stoics prized this kind of rational assessment above emotional reaction. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself to look at things as they are, observing their nature, without adding to or subtracting from them. This practice allows you to extract value from even poorly delivered criticism. The Stoics also emphasized perspective-taking. When stunned by criticism, try viewing the situation from the critic's viewpoint. What might have motivated their feedback? What constraints or pressures might they be under? This doesn't mean excusing truly abusive behavior, but rather recognizing the human context in which feedback occurs. This broader perspective can diffuse the personalization that makes criticism so painful. Another powerful Stoic approach is voluntary discomfort, or what Seneca called practicing poverty. While this might seem unrelated to criticism, Deliberately exposing yourself to uncomfortable situations strengthens your resilience when facing unplanned discomfort, like unexpected criticism. You might practice by intentionally seeking feedback on your work, gradually building your tolerance for constructive criticism in a controlled way. The Stoics also advocated negative visualization, or premeditatio malorum. Before important presentations or project submissions, spend time imagining receiving critical feedback. Ask yourself, what's the worst that could reasonably happen? How would I respond? This practice doesn't invite pessimism, but prepares you mentally for potential criticism, reducing its impact when it arrives. Finally, there's the practice of self-examination without self-flagellation. After receiving criticism, reflect honestly on your work without harsh self-judgment. The Stoics conducted regular self-reviews, assessing their actions with fairness rather than severity. Seneca described this practice. When the light has been removed and my wife has fallen silent, aware of this habit that's now mine, I examine my entire day and go back over what I've done and said, hiding nothing from myself, passing nothing by. These techniques don't eliminate the initial sting of criticism, but they transform how quickly and effectively you recover from it and how much growth you extract from the experience. Real-world applications of Stoic principles. Let's move from principles to practice by exploring how Stoic approaches to criticism might play out in common workplace scenarios. These practical applications bridge the gap between ancient philosophy and modern professional challenges. Imagine you've just presented a marketing strategy to your team, and your director points out several flaws in your approach, suggesting your research was inadequate. The non-Stoic reaction might involve immediate defense, perhaps listing all the research you conducted, or deflecting by highlighting the positive aspects of your presentation. You might leave the meeting feeling attacked and resentful. The Stoic approach would be markedly different. After taking that crucial pause to let the initial emotional response subside, you might say, "Thank you for that feedback. Could you tell me more about what additional research would have strengthened the proposal?" This response acknowledges the criticism without defensiveness and seeks specific information that could improve your work. Later, you would privately evaluate whether the critique was accurate and what you could learn from it. Consider another scenario. You receive written feedback on a project that feels unnecessarily harsh in tone, with comments like, "This analysis is fundamentally flawed," or "I'm disappointed by the lack of originality here." The natural reaction might be to feel hurt and attribute malicious intent to the reviewer. A Stoic would separate the content of the feedback from its delivery. They would extract the actionable insights while recognizing that the harsh tone likely says more about the reviewer's state of mind than about them. They might respond with something like, "I appreciate you taking the time to review my work in detail. I've identified 3 key areas for improvement based on your comments and plan to address them in the next iteration." This acknowledges the substance without engaging with the tone, maintaining professionalism and focus on improvement. Or consider the challenging scenario of receiving public criticism during a team meeting. Your manager questions your decision-making on a recent project in front of colleagues, catching you off guard. Without Stoic principles, you might feel humiliated and either retreat into silence or respond defensively, potentially escalating the situation. The Stoic approach would be to remain calm, remembering that your true worth is not determined by others' momentary opinions. You might respond, "That's a fair question. My decision was based on X and Y factors, but I'm open to considering alternatives if those weren't the optimal considerations." Later, you would reflect on whether the criticism contained valid points without letting it define your self-perception. These examples demonstrate that Stoicism doesn't ask us to be passive or to suppress our emotions entirely. Instead, it offers a framework for responding to criticism in ways that preserve our dignity, maintain professional relationships, and maximize learning opportunities. The Stoic doesn't avoid criticism. They transform their relationship with it, seeing each instance as an opportunity to practice virtue and improve their craft. Common mistakes to avoid. Even when armed with Stoic principles, responding to criticism remains challenging. There are several common pitfalls that can undermine your practice and lead you back to reactive patterns. Awareness of these mistakes is the first step to avoiding them. One frequent error is confusing Stoicism with suppression. Some mistakenly believe that being Stoic means denying or burying emotions. You might think you're practicing Stoicism by forcing a smile after harsh feedback while internally seething with resentment. True Stoicism isn't about pretending not to feel, but about transforming how you process and respond to those feelings. Acknowledge your emotional response internally, then choose your external response deliberately rather than reactively. Another mistake is overcorrection, becoming completely passive in the face of criticism. Stoicism doesn't advocate accepting all feedback uncritically or failing to stand up for yourself when appropriate. If criticism is truly unfounded, or if someone is being abusive rather than constructive, Stoicism supports asserting boundaries. The key distinction is responding deliberately rather than reactively, and from principle rather than from wounded ego. Many also err in expecting instant transformation. After learning about Stoic principles, you might become frustrated when you still feel the sting of criticism, or catch yourself responding defensively. The ancient Stoics themselves acknowledged that philosophy is a lifelong practice, not an immediate cure. Progress comes gradually through consistent application. As Epictetus said, "Practice yourself, for heaven's sake, in little things, and thence proceed to greater." There's also the mistake of selective application, using Stoic principles only for minor criticisms while abandoning them when facing feedback that touches on deeper insecurities. True progress comes from challenging yourself to apply these principles, especially when it's difficult, not just when it's convenient. Finally, many practitioners fall into the trap of intellectual understanding without practical application. Reading Stoic texts and discussing Stoic principles isn't the same as practicing them in the heat of the moment. The Stoics themselves emphasize that philosophy must be lived, not merely contemplated. As Seneca wrote, "Philosophy teaches us to act, not to speak." By remaining vigilant against these common pitfalls, you can develop a more authentic and effective practice of Stoic principles when facing workplace criticism. The long-term benefits of a Stoic approach to criticism. While adopting Stoic responses to criticism requires effort, the long-term benefits extend far beyond simply handling difficult feedback moments more gracefully. Over time, this philosophical approach transforms not just how you receive criticism, but your entire professional trajectory and personal development. Perhaps most immediately noticeable is the liberation from the emotional roller coaster of external judgment. When your sense of self-worth no longer rises and falls with each piece of feedback, you gain profound emotional stability. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to improvement, but achieving what the Stoics called equanimity, a state of mental calmness even amid challenges. This stability creates space for clearer thinking and more deliberate responses in all aspects of work. Another significant benefit is accelerated professional growth. Most of us instinctively avoid situations where we might face criticism, limiting our exposure to challenging opportunities. When you no longer fear feedback, You can pursue projects at the edge of your capabilities, volunteer for high-visibility assignments, and take calculated risks that others avoid. Each criticism becomes a stepping stone rather than a stumbling block. As Marcus Aurelius noted, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. The Stoic approach also transforms your professional relationships. Colleagues and supervisors notice when someone can receive feedback without defensiveness or drama. Over time, you'll likely find that people deliver criticism to you more constructively and specifically because they know you'll use it productively rather than react emotionally. This creates a virtuous cycle where better delivered feedback leads to more effective learning and improvement. Perhaps most profound is the development of genuine self-confidence, not the fragile ego that needs constant protection, but the quiet assurance that comes from knowing your worth isn't determined by others' opinions. This authentic confidence doesn't waver with each piece of feedback because it's rooted in your commitment to growth and excellence, rather than in external validation. There's also the benefit of developing perspective. The Stoics emphasized seeing things in their proper proportion. Over time, you'll recognize that most criticism, even when it feels significant in the moment, is relatively minor in the broader context of your career and life. This perspective prevents single instances of feedback from consuming disproportionate emotional energy. Finally, practicing Stoicism with respect to criticism develops transferable mental disciplines that serve you in countless other challenging situations. The ability to pause before reacting, to separate facts from interpretations, and to focus on what you can control becomes second nature, improving your response to everything from project setbacks to interpersonal conflicts. These benefits don't arrive immediately or without effort, but they compound over time, transforming not just how you handle criticism, but who you become as a professional and as a person. Integrating Stoic principles into your daily work life. Transforming your relationship with criticism through Stoicism doesn't happen overnight. It requires intentional practice and gradual integration into your daily professional life. Here's how to begin this journey of implementation, starting with small steps and building toward a more comprehensive practice. Start with morning preparation. The Stoics began their days with contemplative exercises, setting intentions for how they would face challenges. Before heading to work, take a few minutes to remind yourself of key Stoic principles. You might ask, what feedback might I receive today, and how do I want to respond to it? This mental rehearsal primes you to respond thoughtfully rather than reactively when criticism arrives. Create physical reminders in your workspace. The ancient Stoics carried small tokens or wrote brief maxims to keep philosophical principles top of mind. You might place a small note on your desk with a relevant Stoic quote, such as Epictetus's, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." These visual cues can interrupt automatic reactions in critical moments. Practice with small instances of criticism first. Don't wait for major feedback to apply Stoic principles. Use everyday minor corrections as opportunities to practice. A colleague suggesting a different approach, a client requesting revisions, or a supervisor making a small edit to your work. These lower-stakes situations build the mental muscle memory needed for handling more significant criticism. Develop a post-criticism reflection routine. After receiving feedback, take a few minutes in private to process it stoically. Ask yourself, what part of this feedback is objectively true? What can I learn from it? How much of my reaction stems from the feedback itself versus my interpretation of it? This reflection converts criticism from a momentary sting into a learning opportunity. Find an accountability partner. Share your commitment to Stoic principles with a trusted colleague or friend. Discuss how you've responded to recent criticism and where you might have reacted more in line with Stoic ideals. This external perspective can highlight blind spots in your practice and provide encouragement during challenging moments. Gradually expand your comfort zone by actively seeking feedback. Instead of waiting for criticism to find you, request specific input on your work. You might ask a colleague, "Could you review this report and let me know if my analysis addresses the core business question?" This proactive approach builds your tolerance for feedback while demonstrating your commitment to improvement. Use visualization techniques. The Stoics practiced negative visualization, imagining challenging scenarios to prepare for them mentally. Before important presentations or project submissions, visualize receiving various types of criticism and rehearse responding with equanimity and openness rather than defensiveness. Track your progress. Keep a simple journal noting instances where you received criticism, how you responded, and your reflections afterward. Over time, this record will reveal patterns in what triggers defensive responses and document your growth in handling feedback more effectively. Remember that integration is a gradual process. There will be days when you respond to criticism with perfect Stoic equanimity and days when old patterns reassert themselves. This inconsistency is not failure, but part of the learning process. As Epictetus reminded his students, no great thing is created suddenly, any more than a bunch of grapes or a fig. If you tell me that you desire a fig, I answer that there must be time. Let it first blossom, then bear fruit, then ripen. We began with that all too familiar scene, sitting across from your manager, heart pounding as criticism lands like a physical blow. But now, armed with Stoic wisdom and practical techniques, imagine that same scenario transformed. The words may be identical, but your experience of them fundamentally different. This time, you take that crucial pause, breathing deeply as you separate the content of the feedback from your emotional reaction to it. You recognize that this criticism, while uncomfortable, exists outside the sphere of what you can control, but your response to it remains entirely within your power. You focus on what you can learn rather than defending what you've already done. You ask clarifying questions, seeking to understand rather than to counter. You thank your manager for the specific insights, recognizing that this feedback, however painful initially, serves your growth. Later, you'll evaluate it objectively, implementing what's valuable and setting aside what isn't, all without the burden of wounded pride or shaken confidence. This transformation isn't magical or immediate. It's the product of consistent practice and philosophical commitment. The ancient Stoics understood something profound about human nature, that we cannot eliminate our initial emotional responses, but we can transform how we process and act upon them. In doing so, we free ourselves from the tyranny of external judgment. The workplace will always contain criticism. Projects will be questioned, approaches challenged, and outcomes evaluated. These experiences need not be sources of dread or triggers for defensiveness. Through the lens of Stoicism, they become opportunities, chances to refine your work, strengthen your character, and deepen your resilience. As you leave this video and return to your professional life, carry with you the words of Marcus Aurelius. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. In the face of workplace criticism, this ancient wisdom may prove the most valuable professional skill you ever develop. The path of the Stoic isn't always easy, but it leads to something priceless: the ability to engage fully with your work and your colleagues, unburdened by the fear of judgment or criticism. This freedom isn't just philosophical, it's practical, powerful, and within your reach.